What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Sirvalorsax. Today I want to focus on answering one question. Is a saxophone an electric instrument? Like an electric guitar, an electric keyboard, is a saxophone essentially used the same way? So of course a saxophone is an acoustic instrument. If you play in rock bands, if you play in these small groups where the saxophone is always mic'd, you are essentially playing an electric instrument. An electrical guitar is actually, in fact, an acoustic instrument. The modern electric guitar is, in fact, actually an acoustic instrument. Simply by virtue of you being able to hear me play this instrument terribly, you can hear the thing. I am creating sound acoustically. Damn, let me find a chord. The modern electric guitar is, in fact, an acoustic instrument. It's just almost never played acoustically. There's two ways you can play this thing acoustically. One, the way I'm doing it right now, which, yeah. Or I could take a microphone and put it up to the strings and amplify its acoustic sound. But this instrument is not generally played this way. If you are playing saxophone in a saxophone quartet, then you are playing the instrument for its acoustic nature. But essentially, once you put a microphone on it, now we are using the instrument as though it is an electrical instrument. The whole reason why I'm making a video like this is to try and get the saxophone community to think about what goes into making a saxophone acoustically sound better. When I am reliant on the room that I'm in, the quality of the air, these kinds of things become really important when you are focusing on the acoustic tendencies or the acoustic attributes of the saxophone. My opinion, I feel like the best saxophone manufacturers, Kyleworth, Yamaha, and Selmer, I feel like they've really dedicated themselves into focusing much more on the acoustic properties of a saxophone and being a lot less reliant on basically putting a microphone to the thing. It's electrical amplification. I recently had a chance to try 3 of what I feel like are the best saxophones I've ever played in my life. The Selmer Supreme, the Yamaha AWO30, and the Kyleworth SX90R. The Kyleworth has been around for quite some time, but they've really made a lot of advancements in that saxophone, and a lot of it really focuses on the acoustic nature of the instrument. I feel like Selmer is really starting to change the game with the Supreme and how acoustically present that instrument is. I recently did a comparison between the silver-plated Selmer Supreme and the Selmer Mark VI Alto, and the biggest difference that I noted was how much more present the Supreme was. There was a lot more in that sound that I was able to work with, and it actually started peaking the microphone on my phone more than the Mark VI was. Now, which one sounds better? That is really subjective, but personally, I preferred the Supreme. But I did want to give people a heads up on where I think Selmer, not just Selmer, but where I think the big saxophone companies are in terms of dedicating more emphasis to the acoustic nature of the saxophone. And yes, I left Yamaha off of that list because I feel like Yamahas are set up more for the amplification aspect, more so than their acoustic properties, by comparison to the other big 3. All right, so let's take a listen to some short little clips of those, and you can get a side-by-side comparison. Let's do it. A lot of people have been asking me why I'm interested in selling my cannonball that I've had for a good number of years now. I think it is a wonderful instrument, but I do feel like in general, a lot of the Taiwanese made saxophones, which are really good now, but I do feel like they're built, the fundamental construct of those instruments were built on instruments from 20 to 30 years ago, where a lot of the top saxophone manufacturers are really focusing specifically on the acoustic nature of the saxophone. I do feel like a lot of the Taiwanese made saxophones are really made, they're catering toward amplifying the instrument electrically as opposed to its pure acoustic value. That's not to say that they don't sound good. It's just that playing these instruments back to back, you start to hear a certain kind of direction that they're going in. Plus, having worked on cruise ships for as long as I have and then leaving, I'm starting to understand how the cannonball fit to that gig really, really well. Having such a neutral palette with the cannonball is something that worked really well working on cruise ships, playing with so many different kinds of music, so many different styles. But it was also pushing me into playing the saxophone a certain way. And now that I don't have that and don't want it, I'm free to kind of just follow my own path for what I want to do, what kind of musical experience I want to have in my life. And essentially, I'm trying to find a horn that can allow me to be able to do that more efficiently than anything. So I'm still on the fence about waiting for a Selmer Supreme tenor. I have no idea when they're going to come out with this. I imagine at least something will be said about it in 2023. But in the meantime, I do have some on my list that are kind of ranking higher than others. All right. Do I feel like a saxophone that is focusing on its acoustic properties, do I feel like it loses anything when you put a microphone on it? That's a pretty tough question, but ultimately I think that the way you mic a saxophone can play a huge effect on what it is that you lose. I think you always lose something unless you are recording the room. You're recording the way the sound is reflecting and coming back to the player. I think this is one of the big things that people get confused about. Oh, well, what you're hearing is just in your head because out here we can't hear any of that. No. If you go from one instrument to another, there's real obvious things that you can hear. And also, when you are listening acoustically to someone, standing certain distances from the bell, you can really start to hear the brand defining sounds of those instruments. You hear how certain notes resonate better than other notes. You hear how a certain range of the instrument is responding differently, and you're catching all of that reflection. So to me, the best recordings come from having that acoustic presence. What is the air doing around the saxophone is something that you definitely want to capture. So if you're not designing a saxophone to use that well, then that's something that's lost. So ultimately, to answer the question, I think something is lost whenever you amplify this thing. You can minimize that by just miking the saxophone well. When I was on ships, I was trying to record these instruments in different rooms so you could get an idea of what these instruments sound like in different acoustic environments. Sirvalorsax merchandise is available, ladies and gentlemen. I got the Piece of Cake shirt that's out, ladies and gentlemen. I do have the new ones that are out also. I got some women's attire. I got some bucket hats. I got some dad hats that are available. And I got my Sirvalorsax mugs that are also available. Also, I have some links to Amazon for stuff that ain't mine, that I just think is cool. And of course, I have my Altissimo books for Alto, Tenor. I have my Diminished scales book. It's also got some Altissimo stuff in it. The most requested of all, my Saxophone sound development book that is also available. Check out these links. If you only play in bands where your saxophone is mic'd, I think you should be practicing with your saxophone to develop your sound in a similar type of situation. Even if it's as simple as you putting a mic on your horn, putting on your headphones, and then running that sound through the computer, you're getting a much better idea of what you're going to sound like on that gig, as opposed to doing all this acoustic stuff, expecting to hear it on the gig, and all of those subtle details are getting eaten up by the drums with the cymbal, by the other brass instruments that are cutting into those somewhat quieter overtones. They're all being basically cannibalized by the other instruments. So I think it's a good idea developing your sound if you play in those bands to actually practice the same way that you're doing it. Obviously, if you play in a lot of acoustic settings, then you should try to actually practice in those physical acoustic settings if you have access to them. All right, so I'd like to know what you guys think about the electrified versus acoustic properties of a saxophone. Do you have saxophones that you feel like respond better in one arena than another? Let me know in the comments. So if you like this kind of content and you want to support the channel, ladies and gentlemen, you can buy me a piece of cake. It's like a Kickstarter, Patreon type of thing, but it does help the channel grow when you make a donation. All right, that's all I got for you, ladies and gentlemen. See ya!